welcome DJ to Priceless Advice and Tuesday Tips with Leaders of Volunteers. And as we were getting ready for our conversation today, we were emailing and we were LinkedIn messaging, and I really want to congratulate you on your new appointment to this national volunteering group. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself, where you are now, your career, and what led you to this wonderful moment and honor?
Absolutely, Dana. Well, Dana, I should say.
Dana, wherever country you're from, it's fine. You can
Well, there
pronounce
you
it any
go.
way you
And
like.
I've actually been thinking about it because I know that the pronunciation that you use obviously is Dana. But growing up in Ireland, as I did, it's pronounced Dana in
Right.
Ireland. And we have a very famous Dana in Ireland who was uh, our first winner in the Eurovision Song Contest. If you've ever heard of that contest,
Yes. Yes, I
was
love it.
a lady by the name of Dana. So check her out. She won the Eurovision in 1970 with a song called All Kinds of Everything. And so, yeah, everybody knows Dana in Ireland. But of course, pronunciations are different in different countries. And Dana, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you here today. Thank you very much for inviting me to come on to your show, as I like to call it. And I have been watching it over some time now, and you've had some very excellent people on the show with some wonderful tips. And it's a great format, and what you're doing is really great for the volunteer management profession. So thank you very much for doing what you do, and I feel very humbled and honored that I can talk with you today. And to answer your question, yes, I've just been appointed to join a working group for Volunteering Australia as it embarks on its new national strategy on volunteering here in the country. I'm very excited that I was selected to this working group. It's the Volunteer Management Working Group. There are a number of working groups that will be involved with the new national strategy on volunteering. And what I love about it, and what I love is Volunteering Australia's approach this time. It's truly a collaborative approach, and it involves everyone from the volunteering ecosystem and all its stakeholders to come together to come up and reimagine, I guess, a new way for volunteering, and a strong strategy that can only help strengthen volunteering in our communities here in Australia. So I'm really excited. Dana, I'm very passionate about volunteering. You asked also a little bit about my background. And I guess I've been passionate about volunteering ever since I was, I would say, 11. So that's many,
Oh,
many months ago. But
this many years ago. Yeah.
well, that's right. Yes, that's right. That's right.
Oh,
So I guess I started volunteering in community theatre with a drama group when I was 11, and that's another one of my passions. I've been an amateur actor for all my life, involved in various drama groups, and have loved it. Brought that passion with me to Australia, and it's a volunteering that sometimes often forgot about. People forget that there are a lot of volunteers involved in the arts communities. But I also volunteered at school, at high school, growing up in Ireland. There was a group called the Social Action Group that was set up by one of the teachers. And it was a wonderful idea because it really gave students a chance to get involved in community activity when they're in high school. And I think that shaped me in many ways and many of the students, because when we then go out into the big world, as it were, we take that with us, that sort of community spirit. So I came to Australia about 27 years ago. You wouldn't
oh,
think
we're
so.
saying the years now. Now we're saying the math.
Where's-
Okay. All right. No, go ahead.
you know, I haven't. I don't think I've. When I came to Australia, I kind of, I tried a few different career paths, but I was eventually drawn back into the volunteering world and volunteerism, and in fact started volunteering for an organization. Um, I think it's 27 years ago when I started volunteering for this organization.
Mhm.
And now, 27 years later, I'm the head of volunteering for that same organization. So amazing.
That's a career path that is straight up. And that brings up a great point, and I think this is, I mean, there's a lot of reasons with your talent and your knowledge and experience you were selected for this working group, as was our mutual friend and colleague Tracy O'Neill, so we're
Tracy,
celebrating
I was
that
so,
as
so
well.
delighted. And in
Tracy's
fact, everyone
so
on the
good, yeah.
working group.
Just amazing. And I think it's very helpful to have a creative background or hobby or interest in being a leader of volunteers, of finding creative solutions. But I also want to speak to, there is sometimes this forgetfulness in organizations that you can build sustainability and do legacy planning by having volunteers become staff members, become board members. There's already an overlap with donors, and so I think your journey, your life story and career path is a wonderful example of, there's no status difference really between paid people and volunteers, but it's just a development of a career, whether that's paid or unpaid, supporting an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen many cases of it happen over the years. I've worked for very different organizations, managing volunteers, being business partner for volunteers, managing strategy around volunteers. So my title has just changed recently to volunteer experience manager, which I love.
Mm.
Because it puts volunteering at the center of what I do. And there has been lots of debates, as you well know, in the volunteer management sector about what should our titles be. Is it volunteer coordinator, volunteer manager, etc., etc. So yeah, this one sits well with me. It's all about the volunteer experience. It's all about the life cycle of the volunteer. So yeah, volunteer experience manager at the moment. I've had many titles
Yeah.
throughout my career, but as you did mention, one of the beautiful things about volunteering, and there is so much that is beautiful about volunteering, is that it can be a gateway to employment for people.
Hmm.
And I really do feel that we're not doing enough, Dana. Well, certainly in this country, I can't speak for your own country, about getting into schools and talking about volunteering. I know a lot of schools do civics, but I still think that a lot more could be done in terms of talking to students about one, the importance of volunteering, why volunteering is important for our community, but also the many ways it can help them in their careers. There's been plenty of research that employees or employers, I should say, are looking at people's CVs and are actually quite liking when there is volunteering on the CV, for example. But that's something I would hope will form part of the national strategy here in Australia in terms of how do we reach young people, and how do we make volunteering more attractive to them.
That's an excellent point because, again, going back to your formative years of 11, of tween to teens, and I'm working on actually a blog article right now of when I was 5, I did a beach cleanup. I was in like kindergarten, not even
Yeah,
first grade, and my school was like, we live by the beach. We're going to the beach and we're going to clean up trash, and this is why that's
awesome.
important. And that stuck with
Yeah,
me all these
well, there
years
you
later,
go. Yeah.
all that magical math. And I think that, in the States, most states within the US, the United States, have a high school teenage, usually ages about 14, sometimes 16, where you do a certain amount, usually 10 or 20 hours a school year of volunteering. And
Yes.
there's it's usually pretty successful, but there's some debate And it sounds like there's a similar model in Ireland where you're a teenager in high school and you do some community service hours, and it counts towards your units and your graduation and all of that. And there's always a debate, at least in over here, of is that a voluntold? Like, are we pushing kids into something that then sets up a resentment of, like, you're not the boss of me, which is kind of that age. But
Yeah.
I'm on the other side of that. In my experience working with youth and kids and kind of across the age ranges of volunteers over the years, uh, that's a perfect time to build empathy and connection to each other and connection to an idea of service to others in the community, however it's framed, whether it's with a nonprofit or a faith group or a government agency. I've worked a lot with kind of conservation and government agencies and land protection and animal conservation and things. And so in my experience, there's been that extra connection to nature. And I've also worked a lot with theater groups in the arts. So I think kind of getting that create connection to create your own creativity as a volunteer, we're putting on a show, and also whether it's with nature, but just some kind of service at that age, I think really helps wire those young little brains for empathy and connection and kind of emotional maturity more than almost any other activity that we could have them do.
Yeah, great points, and I take your point on the debates that happen around, volunteering versus pure volunteering versus voluntold.
Interns and students and
Yeah,
service
yeah.
learning,
Look,
all the different levels. Yeah.
yeah, and you got I've kind of sort of struggled myself with those definitions over the years, but I think the place where I've landed is concentrating on the benefits to the end user of whatever the service is. But I think for the student that might think, oh, I have to do volunteering, well, they may change their minds towards the end of their experience when they see the impact that their volunteering is making. And again, like, isn't that what we're all about? We should be demonstrating to volunteers what their impact is. And I think we've kind of missed out on that piece over the years. But I think we're doing it a lot better now that, showing what the impact of your volunteering or your service or whatever you like to call it to the end user is really important. And it does shape your future. It shaped my future. You mentioned yourself your experience on that beach 20 years ago, and
Good with the
so
math again. We're
there you
really
go.
close friends now. Good math. Good
There
math.
you go. So I think it can't be a bad thing.
Yeah.
And look, sometimes we can get stuck in semantics
Hmm.
and stuck in definitions. But community service, volunteering, for me, it comes down to what impact is any of that having on the end user. Well,
Yeah.
that's my belief. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In the community, and at least here in the States, hopefully it is worldwide, because sometimes America just makes up holidays and it assumes everyone else has them. But we're celebrating Global Volunteering Month, and of course, Earth Day is pretty
Wow. Okay.
international. That
Yes,
comes up in
absolutely.
April, and tying that together with your point around the semantics, and sometimes there can be, I've found, and let me know if you've run into this, the kind of some like gatekeeping and
Mm,
the purity of it. And we want to have experts doing the job of leaders and
mm,
volunteers, whether they're CVAs or they just have a lot of
mm,
experience, however they get
mm,
to that expertise. And
mm.
I am of the belief, and I've had conversations with another Australian who happens to be in Thailand, Martin J. Cowling, and
Oh,
I
yes.
talked quite a lot, but talked for Priceless Advice some months ago, that the more we gatekeep, like, well, this is only how we define volunteering, and these are the only kind of people that can do it, and they have to be retirees, and they have to devote all their free time, all of these kind of hoops to jump through, or barriers to try to get past. And we shouldn't have to means test people giving their time and talent. It should be in little pieces or big pieces, or for short times or long times, and whatever fits with them. And so I'm all for, again, using that creativity in how can roles be expanded so that as many people as possible can fit into a role, instead of trying to find one person, one role, which is more of like an HR, human resources corporate
I,
kind of model.
I could not agree with you more. And in fact, there are probably people within our own sector. We talk about a lot. What are the barriers to volunteering? And sometimes we can be the barriers to volunteering. Sometimes we need to look within to and have a real honest look at our practices and our beliefs, because there may be people out in our own very own sector who, for example, are interviewing people for volunteering and decide, well, this is not a genuine volunteer, this is not a pure volunteer, this is a person who's only volunteering because they want volunteering on their CV, or this is a person who's only volunteering because they hope to get a job out of it at the end of it. I I throw my arms open to all of them.
Yeah.
Please, your whatever your motivations are, you should not shape what I think of you, and should not shape whether or not you become a volunteer with my organization. I mean, again, it's all about the volunteer experience itself and the impact that person is making. So that person who may want volunteering on their CV could be potentially having a huge impact in the future at your organization. So putting up that barrier and saying, well, you're not a pure volunteer,
Hmm.
well, you
Yeah.
know,
And again, back to that, pretty much any motivation that gets someone interested and through the door is fine by me. And
yeah,
I've been with organization, and if I were to have a time machine and go back to when I was a baby leader of volunteers in the first few years, I think I was so concerned about the rules of the organization and doing things correctly as I was learning, that I was that gatekeeper too often, and I was too much of a stickler for rules, and I was too much doing things how they've always been done. And it probably took 4 to 5 years into it, after I left my first agency and saw how a different agency worked, that I was like, oh, that was messed up. I
yeah,
I
right,
I
right,
I might have done more harm than good for
yeah,
a little while. Like, yes, we got the work done for this food organization, hot meals and groceries for folks, but when I moved on to different kinds of sectors and saw that, like, oh, you're right, there are a lot of different ways of doing this, and
absolutely,
more trying to understand my own personal and professional biases, and
yes,
how I could expand the definition of volunteering within every organization from then on, and advocate for that, and advocate for that creativity, and say not just these roles but special projects or whatever the volunteer suggests that they can do, that yeah, that somehow supports our mission. Great, do that thing and be in charge of it, and put it on your resume and apply for jobs here, and be on the board and be like, do wear whatever hat and do whatever you want to do to support us, versus there's a separate database for donors, and there's a separate database for volunteers, and there's a separate database for paid employees. How are you hoping to shape things in your working group around attitudes like that? Is that a pretty common attitude down under in Australia?
uh, it can be in
Hmm.
in certain quarters, but I think what you shared there just right now is the fact that we all learn as we get older, as we mature, and I think part of the working group is to guide people through your own experience, and people need to hear stories just like the one that you shared now, and they need, and that's why I think it's very important that one of the working groups is an actual volunteer management working group,
Hmm.
because I've always felt that volunteer managers, they're at the coal face. They actually spot the trends before they're known as emerging trends.
Right.
So we see it, we live it, we have the experience. That's what I hope to offer to this working group, and some of my own learnings, and especially my mistakes over the years, and my thinking on different matters has really changed. There was a time I would be very black and white on certain issues, but now, I think the middle ground is the way to go in many ways.
Hmm.
Volunteering is so fluid, it's so changeable, it's very, excuse me, it's very hard to define
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
sometimes. So But like when I first started, I guess I inherited some bad practices from previous volunteer managers when I first set out many years ago. Like there was a feeling where I first started volunteering that we don't really recruit young people because they're not reliable, they won't stay.
Hmm.
It's a waste of time interviewing them. I mean, like, no,
That old
that's
chestnut, yeah.
that old chestnut. Yeah,
That's
so
like, to me, that's like the legend of Loch Ness. Like that's like Nessie. Like it never quite goes away. Kind of
no, it
pops
doesn't.
its head above the surface every once in a while.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes I'll be talking to a new colleague, connecting through LinkedIn or a Facebook group or Twitter or whatever, and I'm like, yes, but and I say, oh well, what kind of volunteers are you hoping to get for your hospital? It's like, oh, the usual old white retired people. I'm like,
Mm-hmm,
well,
mm-hmm.
that's a very narrow demographic, and
Yeah,
that demographic has shrunk considerably in
yeah,
participation in the last couple of years of the pandemic. So
yeah.
maybe expand your recruitment efforts and trust that if somebody is committing to an orientation or a training, or again, maybe it's just a drop-in thing, but if someone's committing to a regular role, like they
Yeah,
understand that they're committing to a regular role, and get rid of
yeah,
any level of ageism or
yeah.
isms or biases that we have
Absolutely.
out of old patterns, out of old
Even
patterns.
unconscious biasm.
Those are the hardest to find. It bubbles
That
up and you're
is.
like, oh,
I
right.
know, right? Yeah, yeah. But like as you say, we're learning all the time. You know, I don't believe there is such thing as an expert in volunteering, because if you ever hear somebody say I'm an expert in volunteering, then you feel that the learning has stopped.
Mm,
Expert puts that sort of exclamation mark on it. What comes after the exclamation mark? No, we're
mm-hmm.
always learning, and that's why I'm still passionate about volunteering. That's why I'm still passionate around volunteer management, because I'm learning every week. Our struggle in the past, especially in this sector, with being recognized as a profession,
Mm.
being recognized as a profession within your organization. So I can guarantee you, if the term just a volunteer is being used at your organization, then the term just a volunteer coordinator or just a volunteer manager can also be part of the thinking. I'm very fortunate to be working with an organization at the moment that takes volunteering seriously, treats those who lead volunteers in the organization as professionals, and I think that's what everybody should aspire to. You know, you are the subject matter expert.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that you are the
Yeah.
subject matter expert in volunteering at your organization. If you're not valued there, look for an organization that will value you, and you will find it.
Yeah, and again, too many times, either early in their careers, or sometimes, people come into this career from so many directions. It might be a lateral move or a career change.
Mm,
That isolation can get to you. So the
mm,
need for that supportive peer network. And I know pretty recently there's been the expansion with Tracy and Christine and a few others. And Ange getting their CVAs,
that's
certified in
correct. Yeah,
volunteer
that's right.
administration. So however we define the term expert, whether we call ourselves that, or that gets put upon us by other people, just to have that respect and know that we have that knowledge base,
That's right.
um, that's one way to do it. And there's a lot of ways to be expert. CVA isn't the only way, but I was really excited the last few years to see that, and to have more conversations with global colleagues, especially in a time where we couldn't see each other and travel much anymore, the last few years. So this idea of this online connection becoming so much more important. And
I would put it to you,
whew,
Dana, that since the pandemic started, the volunteer management community have probably become more connected than ever.
completely agree. Yeah.
I in April I'm attending the National Conference on Volunteering in Ireland online.
Yeah.
Now, pre-pandemic, that would have been, an event that obviously I would not be attending all the way from Australia. My bank account wouldn't allow that to happen, but
Hmm.
now I can, and it's open for people around the world. I can attend conferences in Texas or California. I'm talking here to you.
I'm in
It's
California, so we're different time zones away. We've time traveled to have this conversation.
one of the first things I did when the pandemic um, began was set up some Zoom calls with
Mm.
anybody that wanted to come from around the world. And that was wonderful, and it served its purpose at the start of the pandemic, because I couldn't believe the amount of people from around the globe that were joining me on these Zoom calls. Since then, Tracy set up a wonderful Facebook page
Hmm.
that has almost 1,000 members now from around the world on volunteer management. So some really great things emerged since this dreaded pandemic commenced.
Yeah, there's definitely opportunities for positive change or silver linings or however you want to phrase it, along with tragedy and trauma and kind of the collective emotional drain
Huh.
and just changing
Yeah.
priorities. And that's something that is a very common topic with friends, with colleagues, and with my clients that I'm advising is everyone's priorities changed. And it's not for us to judge how or why they may not be able or willing to volunteer with our organization anymore. But they've been here for 20 years. It's like it doesn't, no judgment, lots of
Right.
grace, all
That's
compassion, all
yeah.
empathy, and that we will still find people who can and will commit to whatever you need them
Yeah.
to do. There's someone
Yeah.
out there to do anything. There
Yeah.
really is. If you
Yeah.
describe it honestly and correctly, and again, to your point, the impact that people are having, why it's important to do the work, let people self-select and let that resonate with them, and then that becomes their priority or something else is their priority. I want to see if this is a thing in Australia. Where is there a sense, because this has been a very American volunteerism, or even North American, I'm going to include my Canadian pals in this generalization as well, of you're poaching my volunteers, you're taking my volunteers for your organization, and they were with mine, or they're double dipping, they're working for you and they're working for me. And that's another thing that I've tried to get people to shift their thinking on over the years. Hope sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Has that been a thing within volunteering culture where you are?
Um, Look, in my sphere, it is something I have not come across.
Oh, good.
There may well be Australian viewers saying, "Oh, yeah, that's happening all the time," but I haven't experienced that. Um, yeah, so it's really interesting that is your experience there. In fact, I think here the volunteer management community are very sharing. In even in terms of somebody might be looking for a policy or a guideline, and
Hmm.
other organizations are quite happy to share that with them. So I haven't come across that, Dana. So not I'm that's not to say it happens, but I haven't come across that myself.
We're not covering hard research in this conversation. We're purely anecdotal, and narrative storytelling is fine.
Yeah.
Are you Yeah, are you still involved with theater productions like to this day? Have you been, because I've done improv and musical improv, and I haven't done
Yeah.
scripted things in a long time. And I play a lot of instruments, and I used to teach music more often. But that's this career is keeping me plenty busy, which is great. But I love being, when I can. I tried to keep those lives separate for many many years, but now I'm just more than like, nope. I'll sing, I'll play an instrument, I'll do whatever you want. I sang at a Points of Light conference that I wasn't planning to, but I kind of needed to keep the attention of the crowd. So how are you still active in that, and does that come into your day to day job and
Actually,
life?
Dana, the very first time I ever saw you, it was on YouTube, and you were playing a either a piano or an organ, and you were singing a song about either volunteering or volunteer management. So that's the first time
Oh,
I saw you
that
many years ago.
I improvised that song for International Volunteer
That's
Volunteer Day
right. It
some
was
years ago.
wonderful.
That was in my office is also my music room. Yeah, so that was one of my electronic keyboards that I have in there. And later on, I'm like, I probably should have written that ahead of time. I was like, yeah, it was fun to improvise it, but thank you for that.
So in terms of my own, I've kind of I've taken a little bit of a hiatus on my acting, and the last thing I did was directing a play about, I would say, maybe 3.5 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, that was the toughest volunteer management gig I've ever done.
The just yeah, super duper tough to do that in especially community regional theater.
Yeah.
And how long was that production running for, and how many gray hairs did you add to your head during the process? Can you point them
Everyone
out?
that you see right now,
These ones in the front.
everyone I would say. So yeah, that play ran probably around 4 weeks, but not every day of every week. So it would be 3 days a week for 4 weeks.
Mm.
And it was, yeah, it was a real challenge, but I had to really call on my volunteer management skills during that. So directing a play can be quite challenging. I think the reason I've taken a little bit of a break since then is, I've got a young family,
Hmm.
so they're all
They
just
take a
entering,
kids take a
yeah,
little bit of time, just a little bit of your time.
that's right. That's right. So it's something, when the kids probably finish school that I would love to go back into again because, I'm very passionate about that. Now, I started that again when I was, as I said, 11. I worked as a full-time actor in Ireland for a year with a drama group that was sponsored by the Irish government. And in fact, also worked with a guy called Michael Fassbinder,
Yep, we know
who
Michael. Yep.
he was in the same drama group as me. He went on to Hollywood, and I went into volunteer management. So
You're
quite.
probably doing more overall good in the world, improving more lives. He's a very talented man, and I find him entertaining. But that's kind of where my path has gone. Is like what work is really helping the world more,
And that's right.
and I don't have to rely on it with the stress for a paycheck. But I can
Well,
I
that's
can
right.
I can do it as I like to the degree that I like,
Well, that's
and I
right.
can do this work as well, and that's a
But
good
but
balance.
but but my kids are always
Yeah.
having a bit of fun when the latest movie comes on, or they see a picture of him
There's
in
your
the
friend.
newspaper. They'll hand it to me. That could have been you, Dad. That could have been you. And I'm like, well, he had the face, and as my mother always told me, I've got a face for radio, so I'm
Oh.
quite happy.
Well, but you can also turn it around to your kids and say, yeah, if it weren't for you all being born, maybe I would.
Well, I will take that on board. I'll show them this. I'll show them this.
Look, am on a TV show on the internet. This is
Well,
real.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
this is real. Yeah, I've been a little bit amazed that indeed many YouTube productions start to count on Internet Movie Database, and so
You
I haven't
go.
updated my Internet Movie Database from my other acting
Yeah,
days with these programs, but now apparently it's
you can.
possible to do that.
Oh
It's a
my goodness.
non-union production. Sorry, I'm not sending you a paycheck. It's non-union. It's
Oh,
voluntary
I
production.
didn't see that in the fine print, Dana.
Just get a magnifying glass. You'll see it.
I'll have to look at that and speak to my agent because I was under the impression that anyway, we'll discuss this offline.
Yeah, have your people call my people.
For
It's like
people
I'm
go,
not that far from Hollywood. I'm in Malibu, so I'm sure there's a
but I
celebrity within a stone's throw distance if I looked hard
but I
enough.
do look forward to the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yes, a 97% on
I would be
Rotten
hoping
Tomatoes.
so. I would be hoping so. Nothing less.
No dislikes. No dislikes
That's right.
whatsoever. And I'm just so delighted to have this chat. We have some time left. I know that this is again we're time traveling. You're on a Monday. I'm on a Sunday night,
Oh, right.
you're in a work environment. But if we can get, I want to kind of get to how you think the national opinion or attitude towards volunteering in Australia has changed, because I've had these conversations over the last few years off and on with Tracy and with Martin, and so I'm always kind of trying to take the, and even Andy Fryer, trying to take the temperature of how are our countries or parts of the world, is it becoming more of a recognized profession? Do you think this working group as part of this national strategy will help with that, or do you feel like it's just still a really big boulder to push up the hill?
Oh, that's
Just this tiny short
a
little question.
look. I think that the national strategy and the approach to the national strategy is going to, I feel, is going to raise the profile of volunteering in Australia. Um, I think volunteering has always been healthy in Australia. There might have been some, there is actually, has been some decline over the last few years, but there's many reasons for that, pandemic being, one of the main reasons. But I think we will come back better, and I think it's great timing now to have a national strategy. And as I said, I think that the collaboration of so many different parties in this strategy, it's really capturing the entire volunteer ecosystem. So volunteers are involved, volunteer managers involved, corporate Australia will be involved. Government will have to be involved. Government will have to look at this strategy and how they can support the national strategy moving forward. I think that volunteering probably needs better marketing
Yeah.
everywhere, because there are so many people in society who volunteer and don't consider themselves volunteers, or they won't call themselves volunteers because they just help out at the local tuck shop in school, or they help out at the local sporting organization. um, and then sometimes, even when we're doing the census question, and they're asked, have you volunteered in the last 12 months, they probably tick no, because they don't realize that they are volunteering. So I think there needs to be a bit of an education campaign and a marketing campaign about what volunteering is all about, because there is so much volunteering that is going on that is informal as well. And many a large majority of these people who are doing volunteering informally probably don't see themselves as volunteers. And it's important that they do, because then we miss out on that type of data, which is very important data that feeds into the picture of volunteering and what volunteering looks like in a nation. So this is where I think the national strategy is obviously going to be a good thing, because it will raise the profile, and it will set some milestones for the future. It will set some analysis for the future. It will set some research for the future. So there's an academic working group involved that will be doing all the research and helping with research. And as I said, there's a corporate working group involved. There's volunteers involved. So look, this is really exciting stuff, and the proof will be in the pudding, as they say, Dana. And I'd love to come back on your show after a few years to see how this national strategy is panning out.
I'd love to have you back on, like, season 5 of
Well,
Priceless Advice, where we've been picked
yeah.
up by a major streaming service. Maybe we'll be on Netflix by then. I'll have like sold the show and be a
I,
total sellout, and that would be amazing. And
my agent
yeah.
is just giving me the thumbs up.
Oh, good.
He
My
wants to.
lawyer's off to the side going,
No, okay. Well,
we already we already
I'll have my
mentioned
people.
a Disney property. We're in so much trouble talking about Bruno. We're going to be in so much trouble. Well, I think it's very exciting, and I've been wanting to talk to you for so long, and it wasn't just you getting this appointment of like, I've got to circle, I've got to get in touch with DJ. We have to book a show. We're putting on a show with theater
And
people. We're putting on a show.
I was so delighted to hear from you. Your Tuesday tips are wonderful. Your contribution to what's happening in volunteer management is really important. And I know you do this voluntary yourself,
I do
putting
count
in all this.
myself as a volunteer doing this. That is true.
Yeah, yeah, for
Informal
sure. So
voluntary. Yeah, and I think that that's brought us to a wonderful full circle to close out that definition of volunteering and breaking down the gates of gatekeeping, knocking
Mm,
down the barriers, and just accepting that and help and like you said, getting a better PR firm. We'll get our people on that of
mhm, mhm.
understanding that if you're picking up trash in the park with your friends, but no one has asked you to do it, and you've just decided to do it, that counts. And if people aren't counted and the work isn't counted, then
Yeah,
like per any census, like people who aren't counted don't count. And so to
yeah,
get the
that's
value,
exactly what I was trying to say. You articulated it better than I did. Well
we're
done.
having a shared psychic moment. It's
Mm.
fantastic. But yeah,
Absolutely, and it's a movement of humanity, isn't it? I
yeah,
mean, volunteers change the world. Volunteers. There's a fantastic quote by Kofi Annan, and I can't remember it verbatim, but in it he said that volunteers are needed now more than ever
hmm,
in our history, with so much going on. There's volunteers helping with what's happening in Europe, the terrible circumstances
yep,
with the war there. And was it Fred Rogers that said, when there's a disaster, look for the helpers. There will
yeah.
always be helpers.
There will always be
Uh,
helpers. Look for the helpers, and also be one of the helpers. And that another perfect shared brain moment. That's part
yeah,
of what's going into this article I'm writing for the Points of Light community. Is
wonderful.
doing more help than harm, and kind of reimagining people power for
Yeah,
all of us to do more good. And like you said, good for the end user, not good of what, well, I think I'm coming in as a white lady and this is what's good for you. It's like, nope,
no,
we're not
no,
doing that anymore. But that look for the helpers. And again,
absolutely.
in as we're seeing in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine, like there's
Mm,
a very wide definition of volunteers, and formal organizations are on the
that's right.
ground, but
That's right.
you know hundreds of thousands of other people are just doing anything they can. And that's
To
true
help.
of a human aggression, a war
Hmm.
disaster, or a natural
Hmm.
disaster, or a natural event.
Hmm.
People step up in the moment when it
Mm.
counts, and that's what has to be celebrated and understood and shared
And
more.
we have to
Yeah.
share the story of volunteering with the world,
Yes.
especially now, because it is such. I mean, on the face of it, if you're watching TV or you're on the internet seeking out news stories, it's darkness, and
Yeah.
it's been darkness for the last 3 years, unless you're looking for the light.
Yeah.
And volunteering is shining a light. There are so many good news stories out there, but of course, our TV channels are not showing the good news stories as much as they're showing the bad stories, because the bad stories seem to get all the clicks. It's
Mm-hmm.
time to shift our thinking. We need to
Yeah.
tune into some of these good news stories, because it's good for our own mental health. It's good for the world, and there is good in the world, and it is happening. But we just need to shine the light on it a bit more.
And I believe that too, that there's far more helpers than there are people who are causing harm. It's a small percentage
Absolutely,
of people who deliberately cause harm. It's a
absolutely.
slightly larger percentage of people who are just caught up in being parts of harmful systems. But there's so many more people in your world travels and my worldwide wide travels. Like people are people wherever you go, and everybody just wants to live their life and be comfortable and have friends and loved ones and family connections and just be happy in their lives, and doing the most any of us can individually or in groups or in this career to make that more of a reality for more people in the world. I think that's better
And
than any Emmy or Oscar that Michael Fassbender might have.
I was just going to say to you, Dana, what you're speaking about, Netflix needs to do a show on volunteering.
I will call my people. I'll have my
Yep,
people call your people, and
yep,
we'll get it. I'm like I said, I'm stone's throw from the Hollywood studio system, so I'll just go over the hill and do a couple of pitch meetings, and
absolutely.
we'll
A
make it so.
positive story about
Yep.
what volunteers are doing around the world.
Yep.
Focus on one story each week. People will watch it in their millions. There you go.
I think so too. I think so too. I think we've accidentally come up with a brilliant show idea, and let's like you
Yeah,
said, let's see where it goes. And
absolutely.
I know you're going to be brilliant on your working group, and I do want to circle
Thank you,
back. Maybe
Dana.
not in 3 years, but maybe in 6 months or a year.
Anytime, Dana.
We'll talk in between a lot, of course, but I kind of
That
want
would
to
be
do
awesome.
a follow-up episode of like a year later.
Yeah,
DJ and Tracy have done
yeah,
this kind of a
that's
thing.
right. It'll be all grey hairs.
By then, you will have directed another play by then. Well, it's so great to see you and speak to you, DJ, and again, Mutual Admiration Society and friendly cyber stalking online all the time and commenting on threads and being in conversations. But I'm just delighted that you did take time to share your wisdom and your Tuesday tips and your priceless advice with everyone out there watching. And
Thank you, Dana, so much. It's been an absolute honor. I mean, the conversation has flowed so easily for me. I was obviously a bit nervous at the start, but you're obviously a great interviewer. You've got real talent there in putting your guests at ease, and I can't believe the hour has gone already. So I hope your viewers get something from it. But the last word that I would say is, folks, life is so short. Just enjoy every moment for it. We're on this little rock hurtling through space. It's an amazing time in history. Be happy, look after yourself.
do what you can, where you can, whenever you can,
That's right.
and be happy. Look after yourself. I think that's going to be my hashtag for this week. So thank you,
Excellent.
DJ.
Thank
Have
you,
a
Dana.
have a great rest of the time, and we'll chat offline and other conversations very soon.
I look forward to it. Take care of yourself, Dana.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.